Okay, Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Uh, my name is Abul Mansur Muhammad Masih. I feel honored and privileged to have received this prestigious Islamic Development Bank Prize, and I also feel uh, honored and privileged to present today some of my humble contributions. Um, so I want to start off with some uh, observation about what motivated me to come to Islamic financial econometrics. So I would like to say that behind the motivation was one person in my family who influenced my whole life. It was my father. Um, when I was a child, he was inspiring me to try to maintain a balance between moral and spiritual development on the one hand and material, scientific, technological development on the other. When I was in the high school, I remember he was encouraging me to go for excellence in my studies, always referring me to the golden age of Arab science. He was referring me to the 10th century University of Cordova, where the Muslims were on top in the field of science and technology. And they were at the forefront of science and technology for about 600-700 years until the Crusades, in which the Muslims were defeated, and that excellence in science and technology was no longer there. So my father was reminding me of the Cordoba University all the time. That was in the 10th century that they were on top. He also referred me to the first surah revealed on our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Iqra. Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq, khalaqal insana min alaq. Iqra wa rabbukal akramul ladzi allama bil kalam. He was always reciting me, I remember about more than 70 years ago. He was just referring to Iqra and said, Iqra wa rabbukal akramul ladzi allama bil kalam. Here Allah is saying, I taught you the use of pen. So he interpreted that Allah is saying that the seed of knowledge of the whole universe was planted in the brain of Adam, and hence to his generations, descendants, his sons and daughters. But it was the seed of knowledge of the universe. That seed would die out if you do not water it, fertilize it, if you do not cultivate it. For that, what you need is to expand your brain through education in science and technology. So he was just saying that Allah is giving us that knowledge in our brain about the whole universe, but that has to be cultivated, that has to be expanded through formal education and research. So he was actually trying to tell me that I should try for excellence in knowledge, which will be serving two purposes. One is that I will be doing well in this world, and secondly, that Allah will be pleased. So in any activity, he reminded me that from morning till evening, whatever we do, if we have the intention, niyyah, in our heart to please Allah, that will be ibadah. I still remember that that was the major motivating factor which propelled me to come to finally the Islamic financial econometrics, because in teaching or doing research on Islamic financial econometrics, I am actually serving two purposes. One is to be at the forefront of knowledge, which gives me an opportunity to serve Islamic finance, and at the same time, I can also please Allah. So this was the motivating factor which guided me throughout my life, which I had from my father. And I would like to say my humble contribution is to integrate Islamic finance with the recent techniques, recent methodologies. This was actually my humble contribution when I got the opportunity to teach in a university called INCF University in Malaysia in 2010, starting in July. I started teaching advanced econometrics as part of the courses. And actually, I was encouraging my students, they were all graduate students, masters and PhD, to apply the advanced econometric techniques to addressing issues in Islamic finance. And that was the opportunity that I got in INSEF University when I was appointed as a professor of finance and econometrics in 2010 July. And I continued in that university for about 10 years. So that was a good opportunity for me to contribute to Islamic finance, and that's what I actually did. I was inspired by one citation of Professor Jacob Frankl, Harvard University, in which he said, "It is not a choice between rigor and intuition. The issue is not a choice between rigor and intuition, but rather how well-founded on rigor is your intuition." What he actually wanted to say was that the more rigorous, appropriate methodological scrutiny the data are subjected to, the more plausible, acceptable, and robust the intuitive conclusion of the paper for the policymakers, investors, and practitioners. So, in order to illustrate my humble contribution, I go to a few papers. Out of 63 papers, I talk about 4 papers today, just to illustrate how I combined Islamic finance theories with recent econometric techniques to enable me to publish along with my students in the top journals. So let me talk about paper 1, first paper. That was actually whether the Islamic stock returns can be used to hedge against inflation. Now, that paper had a methodology called a Wavelet Approach, as you can see. Now, this Wavelet Approach I introduced in 2010. At that time in Malaysia, quite surprisingly, not a single university in Malaysia knew about Wavelet Approach in finance. Wavelet Approach was very much known in science and physics and mathematics. So this Wavelet Approach actually came to finance many years ago, but it was not in Malaysia. So I had to start off with the application of Wavelet, because what it does is this, that it can give you the results in more depth. That means, for example, here, the contribution of Islamic returns to hedging against inflation, what it does, what stock holding period or what investment horizon will be hedging against inflation. So that is actually given by Wavelet. Now, what is Wavelet? I need to talk a few seconds about it. Wavelet actually decomposes the financial asset prices, such as daily stock prices, into different stock holding periods or investment horizons in order to measure the contribution of each holding period or investment horizon to the daily stock prices. So this Wavelet was quite new to finance in 2010. And I was also the person who introduced to Malaysian audience, Malaysian students at the graduate level, the contribution of Wavelet. So I thought that we should apply this. At that time, it was very recent. Of course, by now it has become very popular in the last 10, 12 years. But in 2010, hardly anybody in Malaysia knew what is Wavelet all about. So that was an opportunity for me that I could apply that recent technique, and I could get some interesting results through the application of Wavelet. What that actually gave me, that technique in that paper, that what should investors, Islamic investors, do to hedge against inflation, to just save the purchasing capacity of their investment, how they can actually hedge against or protect the value of their investment. And the findings were that they should not invest in investment. They should not invest in assets more than beyond 3 years. That means investment beyond 3 years may not be hedging against inflation. And secondly, investment may not be good if you go for longer term investment. They should go for short term investment. So those are the findings of that paper, which are very helpful if any investor wants to beat inflation or wants to protect their investment value from the inflation. Then the second paper that I had actually applied this technique was actually portfolio diversification opportunities. So what I actually tried to examine there, is that whether Islamic finance can be used for portfolio diversification. Because in Islamic finance, as you know, that we are teaching the students that it is just sharing the profit and loss. Islamic finance is mainly based on profit and loss sharing, but many of the Islamic finance investment, many of the Islamic banks or Islamic finance projects were not doing that. They were actually following the conventional interest rate, measures. So what I actually wanted to test, whether Islamic finance can maximize, can optimize the portfolio diversification through investing in Islamic assets. So what we did in that paper was, which Islamic assets will optimize portfolio diversification by applying what we call multivariate gauge. That technique actually gives us two things. One is the correlation between assets. This correlation for portfolio diversification, as you know, the correlation between two assets should be low or negative. And the second thing is the volatility or variance should be low. So we applied that method, and we found that Islamic finance can be very profitably utilized to optimize portfolio investment. That they should try to go ahead with that. The Islamic fund should go ahead with that. Secondly, we found that that Islamic assets can also optimize portfolio diversification regardless of the regime changes. By that we mean whether the regime is a bearish period when the stock prices are going down or bullish period when the stock prices are going up. So Islamic finance can be used profitably even when the regime changes. That is what we have done through application of Markov regime switching technique. Thirdly, we also found which stock holding period or investment horizon would be profitable by applying Islamic finance investment, and that is called Wavelet technique. We just also optimized Islamic finance portfolio diversification by just finding out which stock holding period or investment horizon would be most profitable for that. So these are the major findings of my second paper. We now go to paper number 3. In which we just tested what are the major determinants of profitability of Islamic banks in GCC countries. There, what we found was by testing dynamic simultaneity between factors through a method called GMM, we found out what factors are really influencing the Islamic bank profitability. And we found major finding was that the Islamic banks are affected by bank-specific variables rather than macroeconomic variables. In other words, the bank-specific variables such as equity financing is more important than debt financing because we found that equity financing is very helpful in enhancing the profit, and that is in line with the partnership contract like Mudaraba and Musharaka. So that finding actually encouraged us to go ahead with Mudaraba and Musharaka sort of investment, which is equity financing rather than debt financing. So that is actually what we did by applying that GMM method. And also we found in that paper that what particular phase or stage of Islamic profitability will be good for the investors through a method called quantile regression. So quantile regression actually helped us to find out that which particular phase or stage actually would help the investors to just maximize their profit. And thirdly, what we found that which particular stock holding period or investment horizon will actually optimize the profitability of the Islamic banks. So these findings actually helped us find out how to optimize or maximize the profitability of Islamic banks. We go to the next slide. That is actually the fourth paper that we just wanted to find out that the causes of the backwardness of stock markets in Islamic countries. And what we found that Islamic countries can enhance stock market development by improving, number one, financial openness, number two, legal environment, number three, economic freedom, and number 4, market integration. So that actually helped us to understand my humble contribution. We now go to the impact of this contribution. Now, as I told you before, that I had the opportunity of very good students in ISDF. They came from many countries of the world, mainly Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Middle East. And with the help of those students, I was able to publish in the top journals 63 papers in only 7 years, about 9 papers every year. That is actually unheard of, very honestly, in the academic world. 63 papers in 7 years in the top journals. Normally, people find it difficult to publish 1 paper a year in these top journals. These are all journals which reject 90% of the papers. So you have to be within the top 10% acceptability. And to publish 1 paper is considered as an achievement. So with the help of my students and by integrating Islamic finance issues with the latest techniques, I was, by the grace of Allah, able to publish every year 9 papers, which many of my colleagues could not believe it. So that was my achievement, and that also increased my citation, more than 10,000 citations, and about 47 H index, as you know. These are considered the measure of impact. The impact of my papers can be seen through citation that I have about more than 10,000 citations. And also the second thing is the H index, which is about 47, and that is also quite respectable. So that is the impact. And also my students actually also were employed in different academic institutions. They became associate professors in different universities, and also they became senior executives in many industries. So I think we had some impact on academia and industry through my PhD students. I had the opportunity to supervise 18 PhD students and more than 500 masters in Islamic finance. And they will hopefully keep up our humble contribution through generations to come. Finally, I want to finish with the direction of future Islamic finance. And these are all written down here, that Islamic finance can no longer flourish based on sheer theoretical criticism of conversion finance. Islamic finance should be substantiated through rigorous empirical tests. We should aim to publish in top-ranking journals for maximum exposure. Old techniques which have got unrealistic assumptions should be replaced with techniques which have evolved over time in response to issues in finance and economics and in response to characteristics of the real world. Finally, I would like to say that instead of messaging or filtering the data, what you should do, you should just change the techniques to fit in with the real world data. So it is the technique or methods that should change to fit in with the real world data rather than changing the data to fit in with the technique. Thank you very much.